I feel like Trump and Cuomo have always looked out for each other. Same way they've always been supported by the same foreign countries and billionaire donors.
Are there New Yorkers who gave money to me and gave money to Donald Trump? Of course. Of course.
Why is that an of course?
Well, why not? If you are a New Yorker, you know Donald Trump, you know me. Many of them would give money to Donald Trump and give money to me.
Why? What do you and Donald Trump share in common?
We're New Yorkers.
This guy's been forced to talk a lot the last few months, and it's made it clear that he'll say anything to get back into power, regardless of how dumb it sounds. At this point, I think that's just the vibe that he's going for.
And I could pretend to do a lot of jobs, but I know what
And within his campaign to say anything to get back into power, Cuomo ended up with an unexpected ally. No one is more guilty of using dishonesty and trickery to help Cuomo than Jessica Ramos. But I think the reason why she endorsed him is actually really simple. Because Ramos claims to hate corrupt politicians, but it's the popular ones that she really can't stand.
I regret not running for mayor in 2021. I had been in the Senate for 2 years. I'd already passed over a dozen bills. I thought I needed more experience, but turns out you just need to make good videos.
Her biggest political regret is that she's not already the most powerful person in New York City. You know, that answer takes a lot of self-confidence. Imagine being at a job interview and telling them that the biggest regret of your career is that you don't already fully control the entire company. And she mentioned experience, but it seems like it's Zohran's style online that really upset her, which might be because she's tried to replicate it and it hasn't really gone so well. But before we dive into that, let's go over what probably should be her biggest regret.
The next mayor of the city of New York,
State Senator Jessica Ramos endorsing a rival in the mayor's race she'd called on to resign 4 years ago.
This governor's inability to see outside of his own ego cannot continue to go unchecked.
She's even been a critic recently, telling the New York Post Andrew Cuomo's mental acuity was in decline.
This today is not about forgiveness or about forgetting anything. This is a very sober take on where we are in this race.
Cuomo's sober take? Getting Ramos's support is a one-way street.
she is endorsing me. I'm not endorsing her.
I'm not endorsing her. I mean, how humiliating. She was clearly trying to lend Cuomo credibility, but as we'll show, all that happened is that she completely torpedoed her own career. And of course, a big part of why is that after years of bashing Cuomo, her supporters felt super betrayed by her switching up like this. So let's go over why she'd rather betray everyone than work with politicians like Zohran, who sidestep the gatekeepers and speak directly to the people. Because just like her new best buddy Cuomo, she never really bothered to hide that she was a terrible person. Let's read a little bit from this article back in 2020. Jessica Ramos isn't sugarcoating anything. She is someone that, when she doesn't like what somebody is saying, Republican or Democrat, I start to see the twitches. Jessica Ramos, don't get on her bad side. She had such bad blood with one of her primary opponents that she was denied entry to his wake, where someone shouted at her, "You are not welcome." And someone else that worked with her said that while others might be interested in being polite, she's more interested in telling people what she believes. The way that people describe her really makes her come off like someone who you wouldn't want to work with. And if you're wondering, well, what's wrong with being candid and standing up for what you believe? The problem is, Jessica Ramos is not one of those people. You know, in this article, Zohran Mamdani is mentioned, and Ramos says that her and Mamdani are politically aligned. And in this same article, she calls Cuomo a billionaire-loving Democrat. And make no mistake, Cuomo is still a billionaire-loving Democrat. Nothing's changed there.
Cuomo's Super PAC Fix the City has received major cash from at least 10 donors who own properties either on or neighboring Billionaires Row. Literally the day after we shot this, the landlord lobby gave Cuomo another $2.5 million. That almost doubles the amount of cash the industry has funneled to Cuomo, so just keep that in mind as you watch this.
He was the only true billionaire-funded candidate that had a chance to win. And that's who she endorsed. That's who she put her reputation behind.
He touts a 40-year career in tackling this crisis. And yet
There is today more homelessness in New York than we have ever had before. So I'm here to say that there is such a thing as the wrong experience. Yes, you could have been wrong for 40 years. Andrew Cuomo is no Mario Cuomo. And I think the history books will show that. Do we want the politics of the past that seem to be so much about bullying people and triangulating situations in order to plot and scheme in a way that leads to more power for yourself?
And now we know that she's the type of transactional politician that she was describing. And also, around the time that article was written, Ramos was living with 2 other elected officials in the same apartment in Albany. Fast forward a few years and she's burned both those bridges, with one of the girls not willing to speak to her at all over an argument that revolves around a wedding invite. She also said that Ramos's endorsement of Cuomo is like a deal with the devil. And like most deals with the devil, it wasn't purely a logical decision. It all revolves around her anger towards these pesky, fame-hungry politicians that she can't wait to tell you about.
I think there are people who really want to be famous and are seeking a career in elected office in order to get the pictures, get the headlines, and that's what they're obsessed with, and not necessarily arriving at specific outcomes.
That's interesting.
She really tries to make it sound like she's just too noble to play the social media game. But I've looked into it, and she tried to make similar content. It just came out very strange. And I'd like to prove that by showing one of the most bizarre campaign videos I've ever seen.
I'm putting my voice behind Jessica Ramos for mayor. Jessica isn't part of the old political playbook. She's a fighter with a real record. Someone who's raised wages, delivered $2 billion to excluded workers, and refuses to play by the corrupt rules of guys like Cuomo or Adams.
Who is this guy? He doesn't introduce himself. He's not a person. I've never seen him before. He's not a person I feel like I should know. And he's just speaking to me like he's an authority. Like this is his set. He's a host and he's telling me he's voting for Ramos. But it's bizarre. I mean, this was almost certainly fully produced by Ramos's team. The only place that I know of that this video exists is on TikTok with 300 views. And I get it. It's easy to gloss over stuff like that. But when you really stop and think about it, who takes the time to produce such a weird and off-tilt video? Like, who thinks that this is going to move the needle in any significant way? Like, you can tell that she thinks that Zohran won some sort of social media lottery that doesn't make any sense. But Zohran's message of affordability is always at the heart of all of his videos. But of course, he also put in the effort to figure out how to communicate that effectively, while Ramos, on the other hand, has not. And to be clear, it doesn't make you noble or presidential to waste time producing videos that go completely unseen.
Happy April Fool's Day.
And even when Ramos tried to, she's basically just copying Zohran by doing this sort of man on the street series called The Commute. She stopped after 2 episodes. So that was too much. Having to speak to a real New Yorker while being involved in this sort of production, that was too much for her. It really goes to show how little she cares about her supporters. Her final campaign video is her trying to scare them into voting for Cuomo.
Latinos, inmigrantes, have too much at stake. We need a mayor who knows how to fight him and who has a record of delivering for us. That's why Andrew Cuomo has the backing of those who build this city, who run this city, organized labor.
And people definitely deserve an explanation as to why she switched up. It's not like the people that were upset at her are just some small online minority. Her entire community voted for Zohran like 2-1 over Cuomo. And this is where we can turn to the people who know her best to help explain how she could make such a selfish decision. A Democratic state senator said that she is just thoroughly unpleasant to work with as a personality, adding that Ramos had falling outs with other legislatures and had burned bridges. Another Democratic lawmaker who spoke anonymously questioned Ramos's ability to develop relationships. And this is probably the best time to mention that Jessica Ramos and AOC have been feuding with each other for years. After Cuomo said that he would not be endorsing Ramos, AOC shared a photo mocking her and her entanglement with her former nemesis. And a few years back, Twitter was also the platform where Ramos tried to expose AOC for never being in Queens. And I won't get into all of the details here, but the short version is that she created a situation where the other Queens lawmakers all had to come to AOC's defense and claim publicly that she is in fact available. She said, "I texted her on January 6th that I hope she's okay, and I never even heard back." And then after airing that personal grievance, she then goes on to try to make it about everyone, all of the elected officials in Queens, by making the statement at the end of a tweet that she doesn't meet with local officials. You know, that puts her colleagues in a terrible position. It's one thing to speak for yourself, but Ramos has this thing where to try to dress up her innate pettiness, she will involve other people or entire other communities and ethnicities. And given what we know about Ramos being hard to work with, do we think that all the other elected officials in Queens were lying to try to cover for AOC? Or is it more likely that Ramos deluded herself into making AOC this boogeyman in her head? This representation of the undeserving and unavailable progressive that she hates so much. And whether or not she's correct to hate these people, how did she think this was gonna equal her becoming the mayor? Like, I don't get how she got from A to B on this issue. Zohran thought he could get the job because he was willing to do the work. He was willing to meet people where they were. And according to Jessica Ramos, that makes you bad. That makes you worse than a billionaire lover. It's just very confusing to me, especially when I think about all the better options that were available during this campaign. Brad Lander is a politician that was first elected to the New York City Council in 2010. He's now the comptroller of New York City. And politically, he's less aligned with Zohran than Ramos is. I mean, this is a guy that describes himself as a liberal Zionist. He's also older than Ramos, and he's been in public life longer than her. But instead of stewing in his resentment, he kept his focus on what mattered.
I wish I had pushed for even more housing in my district when I was a city council member, because we need it. But let's be clear, sexually harassed 13 women, marked up that state health department report to undercount nursing home deaths, has now forced taxpayers to spend $60 million on his legal bills, has learned absolutely nothing, taken no responsibility.
Okay, Mr. Lander, thank you.
David, he does not deserve your trust.
You can't let him sit briefly.
And unsurprisingly, Lander played his role, his real role, the one that Ramos tried to distort and confuse people on, which was to help defeat Cuomo and elect a real person. Something that everyone understood when this race began, including maybe most vocally, Jessica Ramos. So, with all that said, let's move on. The day that he lost at the watch party, Ramos was asked how she feels about the election as the results were pouring in. And she said that she still had a good feeling, and that we have to wait to see what happens throughout the night. Less than a few hours later, Cuomo conceded the race, which to me is the perfect representation of what she allowed herself to become. A spokesman for Cuomo, a spokesman for a guy who had no interest in being on the same page as her. Ultimately, Ramos got 0.4% of the votes, which is a little bit under 4,000. Cuomo never went back on his "she's endorsing me, I'm not endorsing her" stuff, and ultimately only ranked himself on his ballot.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Ramos never congratulated Zohran on his win, and she's not endorsing anyone anymore for mayor. There's also now another Jessica, who's launched a primary campaign against Ramos to try to take her seat. And my prediction is that that's going to be a very, very tough primary for Ramos, starting with the fact that she's a terrible fundraiser. She's had a very hard time raising money, and right now she's in the hole for over $125,000 from her campaign. And all of this has led to what this article has called the cancellation of Jessica Ramos. And maybe she was canceled, but once again, the way people talk about her makes it seem like they were happy to get rid of her. Jessica always feels like she's the smartest person in the room, and if you had a disagreement with her about anything, she would drop a hammer on your head. That's not usually constructive to do to your coalition repeatedly. And it's crazy because ever since that primary, Cuomo has basically embodied that shameless media manipulator that Ramos is so angry at.
Trick or treat!
And it's like, whether or not Zohran is using social media cynically and if he's a bad faith actor, I mean, all of that remains to be seen. But we already know that Cuomo is definitely a shill. Same way we know he's the preferred candidate of Bill Ackman and all the real estate ghouls that run New York City. That's why I don't really think that there was a practical reason why she teamed up with Cuomo. Of course, she thought that he was going to win and that on some level that would help her career. But even if that had happened, her reputation still would have been destroyed. And it's like, for what? For her to go work for Cuomo? You would think that, given what she knows, she would see that as a nightmare. The risk completely outweighs the reward, and that's why all the other candidates that had bashed Cuomo did not endorse him. But I really doubt that Jessica Ramos was worrying about any of that. I think she was focused on this young politician that she thought was a phony, that was quickly passing her in the hearts and minds of her own community. And to Jessica Ramos, nothing is more important than appearing like the serious politician, appearing like the smartest person in the room, and she's completely hostile to anyone who threatens her position or challenges her idea of what a politician should be. And I want to say that it's particularly upsetting that a young person like Jessica Ramos would find Zohran's way of communicating with people to be so beneath her. Especially considering in politics, the only other option is to do the type of shit that Cuomo does, which involves rage baiting the public and using billionaires to flood your terrible ads on television. I really hope that this whole debacle with Cuomo, at the very least, has reminded her that the only thing serious about a politician like Cuomo is how seriously low he will go in his never-ending campaign to leech off of the public.